Theme parks are designed around one promise that when you hand over your safety to a machine, the machine keeps its end of the deal. Restraints hold, tracks stay intact, systems don't fail. Thank you for watching, but sometimes they do, and when they do, cameras are already rolling. Case 1. Stardust Racers Universal's Epic Universe, Orlando. Universal's Epic Universe opened in Orlando as one of the most anticipated theme park expansions in years. Among its flagship attractions was Stardust Racers, a high-speed coaster designed to simulate two comets racing through space side by side, crossing tracks mid-air at over 60 miles per hour. The engineering behind it was precise. Every movement was calculated. Every outcome was predicted before a single rider ever boarded. That promise failed on the day Kevin Rodriguez Zavala visited with his girlfriend. Kevin used a wheelchair and had limited support in his lower body. When he boarded Stardust Racers, his girlfriend noticed that the restraint didn't feel as secure as it should. The ride was dispatched anyway. As the coaster climbed toward its first drop, everything still looked routine from the outside. Restraints checked, seats locked, normal in every visible way. Then the drop came. Without lower body support, Kevin had no way to brace himself against the forces of the ride. His girlfriend tried to hold on to him. The speed and the physics of the coaster overwhelmed anything she could do. His body was forced repeatedly against the restraints and the structure of the ride itself. His head struck a metal bar. Then again, then once more after that. The ride never stopped. Nobody outside the car knew what was happening inside it until it was already over. By the time the coaster returned to the station, Kevin was unresponsive. CPR was started beside the ride. Responders worked for nearly 15 minutes. He was taken out on a stretcher. Kevin Rodriguez Zavala was pronounced dead from blunt force trauma. Investigators examined the ride in detail. The restraints, the systems, every mechanical component. They found no failure. Nothing had broken. Nothing had malfunctioned. The ride had done exactly what it was designed to do. And that's the part that stays with you. Nothing went wrong with the machine. The question of what did go wrong and how a man boarded a ride and never came home sits in the space between the mechanical report and the reality of what witnesses described. Case 2. Fujin Raijin 2, Expo Land, Osaka, Japan. August 2007. Expo Land in Osaka was packed with families on a summer weekend. The most popular attraction that day was Fujin Raijin II, a standing roller coaster one where riders were held upright rather than seated, known for its intensity and speed. Teenagers filmed it on their phones. Parents watched from below. Riders locked into their restraints and gave thumbs up as the train rolled out of the station. What none of them knew was that one of the wheel axles under the last car had been slowly cracking for years. Inspectors had visited the ride. Maintenance logs had been signed. The damage was internal, invisible, growing worse with every single run. The coaster climbed its first hill. The click of the chain lift echoed across the park. At the top, it dropped riders screaming through twists and turns at full speed. Everything felt normal. Then the train entered a sharp curve. That's when people nearby heard it. A loud metallic snap, sharp enough to cut through the noise of the park. Some witnesses turned toward the sound. Some assumed it was part of the ride experience. It wasn't. The cracked axle shattered completely. The last car lifted off the track and slammed sideways into the metal railings. Sparks flew. The car shook violently. The screaming from inside changed no longer excitement, now pure terror. From the ground, onlookers watched the coaster scrape along the structure instead of following the track. A 19-year-old student in the last car was thrown sideways with enormous force. The train ground to a stop. Silence fell, then screaming. Visitors ran toward the ride. Emergency crews arrived. Firefighters climbed onto the track to cut restraints and free the trapped riders. Several people were injured. The student did not survive. Investigators later confirmed what the maintenance records hadn't shown. The axle had been deteriorating for years. It should have been detected. It should have been replaced long before that August morning. The failure wasn't sudden, it had been building with every ride that had run since the crack first appeared. Expo Land closed Fujin Raijin II permanently. Not long after, the entire park shut down. The track was dismantled. The ride is gone. The footage remains. And watching it back, everything looks completely normal right up to the moment the sound reaches the cameras. Case 3. The Mindbender, West Edmonton Mall, Canada. Most roller coaster accidents happen outdoors. This one happened inside a shopping mall. The Mindbender was one of the most intense indoor coasters ever constructed, running above food courts and stores through a series of loops at highway speeds inside West Edmonton Mall in Canada. It had operated safely for thousands of cycles. Families rode it, teenagers lined up for it. It was a normal part of the mall's daily atmosphere. On the 14th of June 1986, a Saturday evening, The mall was full. Music echoed through the corridors. Teenagers dared each other to ride one last time before closing. The train rolled out of the station and everything, from the ground, looked routine. But hidden under the last car, something was already coming apart. Several bolts holding the wheel assembly in place had been loosening gradually over weeks. Maintenance crews had noticed unusual vibrations. The ride kept running. The coaster dropped into its first curve. Screams filled the building. Then a sound cut through the noise, a deep metallic grinding that didn't belong, echoing through the entire mall. Shoppers stopped mid-stride, heads turned. Inside the last car, riders felt violent shaking. The excitement on their faces changed to confusion. This wasn't part of the ride. The wheel assembly broke free. The back car swung outward and hit a concrete support wall at full speed. The impact sounded like an explosion inside the building. Metal twisted. The train kept moving, but the damaged car dragged behind it, barely attached. The coaster entered its final loop. Without proper wheels, the last car didn't carry enough momentum. It slammed into the bottom of the loop. Seats were crushed. Riders were thrown forward. 3 passengers in the back car were killed. Others suffered serious injuries. The mall went silent. Music cut out. Stores pulled their security gates. Emergency alarms replaced the usual background noise. Firefighters came inside and climbed onto the broken track. Stretchers crossed the mall floor. The investigation that followed revealed a brutal conclusion. 4 critical bolts were missing. They had worked loose over time and fallen out. The ride should not have been running. It should have been caught. It wasn't. The Mindbender was shut down immediately, rebuilt with major safety modifications, and eventually reopened. But 3 people who walked into a shopping mall that evening for what should have been an ordinary Saturday night never came home. Case 4. The Smiler, Alton Towers, United Kingdom. The Smiler at Alton Towers was one of the most technically advanced roller coasters ever built in the United Kingdom. It held a world record for the number of inversions, 14 loops, and was equipped with a computerized safety system specifically designed to prevent collisions on the track. On the 2nd of June 2015, that system was overridden by the people operating it. Earlier that day, an empty test train had stalled on the track due to a computer error. Under the park's safety protocols, the ride should have been shut down entirely until the situation was resolved. Instead, operators concluded the system was malfunctioning and that the stalled train had already been moved. It hadn't. A full train of riders was dispatched from the station. Passengers had their phones out. People were smiling. The coaster moved through its early loops without incident. Then it began to slow. High above the ground, the train came to a near stop. Riders laughed nervously, unsure whether this was intended. In the control room, alarms were flashing. Operators, under pressure to keep the ride moving, made the decision that would define the afternoon. They manually overrode the safety system and released the brakes. Below the track, workers had already realized the truth. The empty test train was still sitting directly ahead. They shouted. They waved their arms. They tried to reach the control room. The loaded train had already rounded a blind corner at speed. Riders saw the motionless train in the same moment they hit it. The collision crushed metal against metal. Passengers were thrown forward. Some were pinned by twisted steel inside the cars. Blood was visible. Legs were trapped. The park fell silent below. Helicopters circled. Rescue crews climbed the track structure with cutting equipment. Riders sat trapped at steep angles for hours, exposed, in shock, unable to move. By the time the rescue operation ended, the damage was permanent. 2 riders lost their legs. Every other passenger on the train suffered injuries. The investigation confirmed there was no mechanical failure in the ride itself. The track worked, the coaster worked, the safety system worked. The crash happened entirely because the people responsible for overseeing the system chose to override it rather than trust it. Alton Towers was issued the largest fine in UK theme park history. Safety procedures across the industry were rewritten. The Smiler eventually reopened after an extended closure. The 2 riders who lost their legs did not get that option. Case 5. Rocket-style ride, St. Petersburg, Russia. At Divo Ostrov Amusement Park in St. Petersburg, a rocket-style ride was built around a simple and well-established mechanical principle. A system of cables launches riders more than 60 meters into the air, then controls the descent back down. When every component functions as designed, it is a controlled and repeatable experience. When one component fails, the entire structure loses the thing it depends on most. The ride lifted off normally. From the ground, it was another routine cycle. Riders ascended smoothly past the park grounds, the city spreading below them. Then, at height, a sharp sound cut through the motion. One of the main support cables snapped under tension. The sound reached witnesses before the visual evidence did. The ride jolted violently. The balance of forces that had kept the gondola stable collapsed in an instant. What followed was not a controlled descent. What makes this case harder to process is that it was not the first time this park had seen a serious incident. Another ride at the same facility had already left a young girl severely injured. The pattern of failures at Divo Ostrov raised a question that went beyond a single cable. At what point does a history of incidents stop being coincidence and start being a systemic failure of oversight? The investigation pointed to mechanical failure as the cause. The cable had been under stress in ways that inspection had not caught in time. A system that depends entirely on maintaining precise tension across every component has no margin for the kind of deterioration that goes undetected. When the margin disappears, so does the control. Case 6. The Haunted Castle, Six Flags Great Adventure, New Jersey. Not every theme park disaster involves a mechanical failure. The one at Six Flags Great Adventure in New Jersey in 1984 was built entirely out of the materials used to construct the attraction itself and the absence of the systems that should have protected the people inside. The Haunted Castle was a walk-through maze built from trailers, plywood, and foam insulation. It was dark by design. Visitors were supposed to be disoriented and confused. It had almost no lighting, no fire suppression system, no sprinklers, no emergency exits that were easy to locate, and no fire detection equipment. It was, in retrospect, a structure that should never have been approved for public access. On the evening of May 11, 1984, a group of teenagers, including several celebrating a birthday, entered the maze. Deep inside, a lighter was flicked. Investigators believe it was done carelessly, without any intention of causing harm. The flame touched a foam wall panel. The foam ignited in seconds. At first, some of the group assumed it was part of the attraction. The smoke was thickening, and the heat was building before the reality registered. By the time anyone understood what was happening, the fire had moved faster than the exits could be found. The walls and ceiling were made of highly flammable materials. The maze structure acted as a tunnel, pulling flames and thick smoke deeper into the passages. When the power failed, the maze went completely dark. Boys ran with their hands against the walls, coughing, calling out to each other, trying to retrace their path through a space designed specifically to prevent that. Some found their way out, some did not. Outside, guests noticed smoke rising from the roof of the building. Many assumed it was part of the show until flames broke through the surface. Firefighters arrived quickly, but the structure was already fully involved. When the fire was out, 8 teenagers had died, most from smoke inhalation, some within feet of exits they could not see. The investigation found that the Haunted Castle had operated without meeting basic fire safety standards. It should not have been open. New regulations governing flammable materials in public attractions and mandatory fire safety systems were introduced in the aftermath. The site was cleared. Nothing was rebuilt there. The legal and regulatory changes that followed came too late for the 8 people who went into the maze that evening and didn't come back out. Case 7. Verrückt Waterslide, Schlitterbahn, Kansas City. Standing over 168 feet, Verrückt at Schlitterbahn Water Park in Kansas City was once the tallest waterslide in the world. The name meant insane. Engineers had warned during development that the ride's behavior was unpredictable. Test runs used sandbags to simulate rider weight. The design went through repeated modifications. The park wanted records and headlines and kept pushing toward an opening. On a summer afternoon in August 2016, a group boarded a raft together, 2 adults and a 10-year-old boy seated at the front. Real footage shows the raft being positioned at the top of the slide. The descent began, picking up speed through the first massive drop before racing toward the second hill, which was engineered to slow the raft down before the next section. The raft didn't slow down enough. It went airborne. Witnesses described it lifting completely off the slide surface. When it came back down, the front of the raft struck a metal support structure positioned above the track. The impact was immediate and catastrophic. The ride was stopped. Guests were cleared from the area. Emergency crews converged on the slide. The boy seated at the front did not survive. The investigation that followed exposed a design process that had relied on trial and error rather than rigorous engineering modeling. Safety testing had been inconsistent. The warnings from engineers about unpredictable behavior had not been acted on in any way that changed the fundamental physics of the ride. The metal support structures positioned above the track had been placed directly in the path that an airborne raft would travel. Verrückt was shut down permanently. Schlitterbahn eventually faced criminal charges in connection with the death. The slide was demolished. The record it held is gone. The footage of that afternoon still shows the raft moving normally right up to the point it doesn't. Case 8. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, Disneyland, California. Big Thunder Mountain Railroad at Disneyland is one of the most recognized roller coasters in the world. A family attraction, a classic. a ride that millions of parents have boarded alongside their children without a second thought about safety. It had operated for decades without a fatal incident. On September 5, 2003, a train loaded with riders entered the mountain tunnel and disappeared from view exactly as it had done countless times. From the outside, nothing looked different. Inside the mountain, hidden from the cameras and the crowds, a mechanical coupling connecting two sections of the train had failed. The train separated while moving at speed. One section continued forward along the track. The other section struck the tunnel structure. Riders felt a sudden violent jolt. Some were thrown forward into the structure ahead of them. Others were slammed sideways by the impact. The sound inside the tunnel was metal grinding against metal. The train derailed in the darkness. A passenger near the front, Mark Hicks, suffered massive internal injuries from the force of the collision. Other riders were left bleeding and disoriented in the dark, unable to understand what had happened or where they were. Above ground, guests began to notice that the train had not emerged from the mountain. Cast members grew tense. The attraction was quietly shut down. Emergency crews entered through narrow service walkways with flashlights and evacuated riders one by one from the broken train. Mark Hicks did not survive. Disneyland rarely acknowledges accidents publicly, but this one could not be contained. The investigation found that the failed coupling had been improperly maintained. Metal fatigue had been developing over time. The failure had not arrived without warning. It had been building across inspections that hadn't caught it. Big Thunder Mountain was closed for over a year. The entire ride was rebuilt: new trains, new safety systems, new inspection protocols. When it reopened, it looked exactly the same as it had before. Today, riders board it, disappear into the tunnel, and emerge on the other side. They have no reason to think about what happened in that tunnel in 2003. That's what makes these cases stay with you. Every one of them looked normal right until the moment everything changed. The cameras were already rolling, the crowds were already watching, and nobody saw it coming until it was already over.